Hippocrates, who was the father of modern medicine, suggested that all disease starts in the gut. And many of us are even calling our gut the second brain. What is it about the importance of gut health beyond digestion for our body and our mind that people don't know about often?
Until recently, we thought that the intestinal microbiome, that is the microbes that live in the gastrointestinal tract, we thought it was a colon issue. That is microbes that resided in the 4 to 5 feet of colon, way, way down in the digestive tract. Well, that's not true. That colonic microbiome communicates with all the rest of the body. I've been thinking lately about, for instance, prostate health, which is not often talked about. Well, the prostate gland, of course, is right next to the rectum. When your doctor examines your prostate glands with a finger right there, and the prostate gland is right there, so it's a couple of millimeters away from the rectal microbiome. Be no surprise then that the prostate gland is influenced. And even this issue, Sean, is much underappreciated. The rectal microbiome plays a big role in prostate health. Pardon me. As does the urinary microbiome, because the bladder's right there also, right above the prostate, and the urethra that conveys urine to the outside goes right through the middle of the prostate. So no surprise, the rectal microbiome, urinary microbiome, urethral microbiome plays a role in prostate health. By prostate health, I mean such things as prostatitis, infectious or inflammatory, benign prostatic hypertrophy, BPH, and prostate cancer. Well, here's the shocking thing. And I tell you this, Sean, because it illustrates what's going on in the microbiome. If you look at the prostate, you've got skin microbes in it, like Cutibacterium acnes, the microbe of acne. You've got stomach microbes, like Helicobacter pylori. You've got mouth microbes, like Porphyromonas gingivalis. You've got vaginal microbes like Lactobacillus crispatus, presumably obtained via intercourse with your female partner, as well as rectal, and you have what's called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The small intestine is not even close to the prostate, but when fecal microbe, and this applies to half the population in North and South America, half the population has allowed the overproliferation of fecal microbes in the colon where they belong, and they've ascended into the 24 feet of small intestine. Small intestine is not equipped to handle this. It's very permeable because that's where we're supposed to absorb nutrients like vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. So when fecal microbes inhabit the small intestine where they don't belong, that very permeable small intestine allows toxic components of those microbes, specifically something called endotoxin, to enter the bloodstream. And we call that endotoxemia. So small intestinal infestation, colonization with fecal microbes, very permeable, toxic components enter the bloodstream. And among the many, many consequences of that, including dementia, heart disease, rosacea, psoriasis, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, thyroid disease, you name it, premature delivery of a child, among prostatitis. So in other words, the prostate, I call it the grand central station of the microbiome because everything seems to go past through the prostate. But it illustrates, Sean, that the microbiome we thought was this colonic issue, no, is a body-wide issue, what we call the holobiome. If the prostate can have skin microbes, stomach microbes, female vaginal microbes, airway microbes, rectal microbes, and endotoxemia from the small intestine, it's clear that we are walking bags of microbes that communicate with each other. And so to ignore that is to ignore a huge part of human anatomy and physiology.
Wow. It seems only that it's been a recent thing that people have been aware of gut health, taking care of their probiotics, prebiotics, and it doesn't seem like it was something that was talked about a lot. So what is the difference of 50 years ago compared to now? Do we just have more research that shows that gut health is just an important part of every part of our bodies? Or what's been the difference, I guess?
It's not one thing, Sean. It's a whole bunch of things. One is that the use of what's called DNA sequencing and various methods of DNA sequencing. So up until recently, all we had was culturing. That is, you took some body fluid like stool or urine or sputum, you put it on a plate of agar or other material to grow the microbes. Well, the problem is the vast majority of microbes in the human body die upon exposure to air, to oxygen. And so over 90% of the microbes that we harbor in our bodies were not identified until we DNA sequenced them. So that has changed everything. Also, the inaccessibility of multiple microbiomes in the body. So the small intestine is relatively inaccessible. In other words, if your doctor does an endoscopy through the mouth, it reaches to the duodenum, rarely to the upper jejunum. If they do a colonoscopy, they can look at the colon. But the 24 feet of small intestine is largely no man's territory. So this becomes a problem in clinical practice. For instance, if you had, let's say, gastrointestinal hemorrhage, you're passing blood into the toilet. Well, they first do an upper endoscopy, make sure you don't have a bleeding ulcer or stomach cancer. They do a colonoscopy, make sure it's not colon cancer, for instance. Well, what if they see nothing and you're hemorrhaging? Well, it's a small intestine. Well, the small intestine, Sean, is 24 feet long. How do you pinpoint where the bleeding is? This is a real serious clinical problem because if someone's hemorrhaging, they're getting blood transfusions. How do you stop the bleeding? This is a big problem. That's why we have such things as capsule endoscopy to try to see where the bleeding is. And maybe that has to be removed. Anyway, the point is that the small intestine is no man's land. It's very difficult to assess. Yet a lot of the microbiome issues that affect modern people come from the small intestine. And that's only recently come to light. It's not been incorporated into clinical practice. If you go to the doctor now and say, hey, I think I have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That is the overproliferation of colonic fecal microbes in the small intestine. Your doctor will say, oh, Sean, did you consult Dr. Google again? Or there's nothing wrong with you. There was nothing seen on your upper endoscopy nor your colonoscopy. It's all in your head. You'll get these kinds of idiotic answers because it's going to take probably a generation or two, 20 to 40 years, before this kind of wisdom passes down to clinical practice.
Yeah, so there's a lack of incentive for them to even take the risk of, prescribing you with something that might be around your small intestines because they haven't been properly trained to even solve something like that.
Make a good point. It doesn't pay. That's a real problem, mostly here in the US, where healthcare is all about money, has nothing to do with health. It's what pays best. So endoscopy pays well, colonoscopy pays well, liver biopsy pays well. Getting you healthy by addressing, for instance, the small intestinal microbiome does not pay well. And so it's up. That's why I do what I do, and I think you do what you do, is because these messages, as critical, as important as they are to people's health, it's not being passed on by doctors for the most part. This is a big problem in the U.S. That's why you can have an $80 million, for instance, wing for cardiovascular health added onto your hospital because heart disease specifically is a huge moneymaker. Yet there's tons of things people can do to reduce heart disease risk. And it has nothing to do, by the way, with saturated fat, total fat, cholesterol, statin drugs. Those are enormous wastes of time and resources. Likewise here, the microbiome. The doctor's just not keeping up with the science. That's the bad news. The good news, Sean, is that there's enormous things you can do. The science has yet to fully mature, but there's already numerous things people can do to take control of the microbiome and thereby have better control over weight, and abdominal fat and blood pressure and blood sugar and heart disease and dementia. All those things are all issues of the microbiome.
Before we go into ways that they can take care of their gut, I think some people may not even be aware that they have a unhealthy gut microbiome or have issues with their gut health. So what are the top signs that someone has an unhealthy gut microbiome or gut health?
A real common one in the U.S. is food intolerances. People say things like, I can only eat 7 foods, which of course is extremely unnatural. Or they say I have to be on a low FODMAPs diet or a low histamine diet, or I can't eat nightshades like eggplant, tomatoes, or I can't eat fruit that contains fructose. All these are signs of SIBO. People think,
Huh.
oh, if I eliminate those foods, I'll be better. No, you're not. You haven't addressed the SIBO. And if you have the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and all you do is eliminate the foods you think cause the symptoms, you're now opening yourself up to weight gain, type 2 diabetes, dementia, coronary disease, atrial fibrillation, rosacea, neurodegenerative disorders, autoimmune disease. In other words, it's very foolish to put your head in the sand and ignore the fact that the driving factor here is the disruption of the microbiome. So you must address these factors. And conservatively, Sean, conservatively estimated, half the population has this problem.
Wow. Are you talking about people that have allergies? So growing up, people would often have peanut allergies in Canada or in the US, or some people can't eat seafood, but it's been their whole lives. So I don't know if that means that they have SIBO necessarily, if it's been like something that they've struggled with their whole lives, or if it's allergies, or is it if they've noticed something that they've had recently and they had an intolerance of it, is that a sign of SIBO versus something that they've had their whole life?
The issue with allergies is less clear, but it is clear that if you develop some kind of intolerance, allergic or otherwise, as an adult, it's almost always SIBO. And what happens is you correct the SIBO, which, by the way, is not a quick and done. It's a lifelong effort because we're just surrounded. We're flooded. We're surrounded, drowning, Sean, by factors that contribute to SIBO. It could be chlorinated drinking water. It could be lack of sunlight, like in northern climates, like I live in now, and thereby red light effects, infrared on the abdominal microbiome. It could be exposure to antibiotics. It could be ubiquitous glyphosate from the herbicide Roundup and other herbicides and pesticides. It could be preservatives in food that are antimicrobial to protect your food, but also are antimicrobial in your gastrointestinal tract. It could be emulsifying agents, blending agents in your ice cream or salad dressing. So it's not a one and done. It's a constant lifelong battle to push back the proliferation of unhealthy fecal microbes in the colon, but even more so their ascent into the small intestine.
Wow. So it's not just because I always thought it was just going to be around antibiotics, because that's an obvious one. If you take antibiotics, you're going to kill all the good bacteria in your body, and therefore your body's not going to be as protected, and you're going to have to rebuild that up. But you're saying also it's artificial sweeteners like aspartame that is very common in gum, even these sugar-free gums that exist around. They have all of these Diet Coke, even lack of sunlight, chlorine water. You're saying all of these can impact lead to poor gut health at the end.
Poor gut health, poor metabolic health, obesity, heart disease, dementia, all those things. So all the things we're familiar with. By the way, since I know you're in Brazil, if you went into the populations in the rainforest, the few unexposed to Western life, many are now, of course, but if you find one of those isolated populations of the Yanomami, you would find they have no obesity. There's no type 2 diabetes. If you were to test them, this has been done. There's no dementia. There's no colon cancer. There's no diverticular disease. There's no constipation. They have other problems, right? They have insects and dengue fever. They have their own problem, injury, but they don't have the problems that we have. What anthropologists have called for decades, the diseases of civilization. The irony here is that that little realization opens up a whole new bunch of questions, right? But in the U.S., for instance, especially bad. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, USDA, rather than addressing these issues, have made it worse because they're still following what they thought was science from 40 or 50 years ago. The misinterpretations of science that they thought said you should cut your saturated fat, cut your cholesterol, weigh your diet in favor of grains, and everything in moderation. This is a formula for disaster. And Sean, we see it play out. Americans have one of the fattest, most unhealthy populations on the planet, despite spending $3 trillion a year in healthcare.
And it's the most in the world, right?
The most in the world. Go to
Yeah, we're the
Walmart,
fattest.
go to Target, you'll see the effects. Massive obesity, people taking 10, prescription medications, paying huge amounts in healthcare insurance. So what we're doing, of course, is not working, but it means rejecting so much of what we've been told over the last 40 or 50 years, like cut your fat and cholesterol, everything in moderation. All that's nonsense. It's all not true.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard the Hadza, um, the tribes, one of the few actual tribes that are out there that actually hunt and gather food. Canadian scientists actually went in to try and study their poop to see if they can try to create some understanding of what's going on in their microbiome, because they've never seen microbiome like the way they have in these tribes that are kind of isolated from Western medicine, Western lifestyles, the modern diets that we have today. So, do you think just what looking at that, but just based on how healthy their microbiomes are, is it the restrictions that they have from the typical diets that we live that we eat today, and the kind of the water, the chlorine water, and all that stuff, or is it the fact that they're eating certain foods in their natural habitat that's creating all of these microbiomes?
It's all those things, Sean. So it could be the Hadza in Tanzania, it could be the Maasai in Kenya, could be the people on the east coast of southern Africa, the Malawi. It could be the Aboriginal people in the Brazilian or Venezuelan rainforest, the Yanomami. Could be the people living in the highlands of New Guinea. That's a crazy thing. These are people, of course, who don't talk to each other. They don't have cell phones. They don't fly by airplanes. So they're separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Yet their microbiomes are oddly similar. They
Mm.
have species we don't have. We have species they don't have. They have far greater diversity. So it's probably a combination of all these things, not being exposed to antibiotics and glyphosate and herbicides and chlorinated drinking water. It's eating foods that hunter gatherers, because we are at our genetic core hunter gatherers. But you'd never know that by watching somebody in line for a takeout at McDonald's or getting a clamshell delivered by Uber. You would never know that we are meant to be hunter gatherers. We live a life of processed, ultra processed foods, often devoid of things. One of the so you know, in some ways, Sean, maybe we should be grateful for all the blunders made in dietary guidelines. Cut your fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, all that stuff. Among the things that have been lost, for instance, among many things, is collagen and hyaluronic acid. So, in other words, your great grandma would eat brain and stomach and intestines and pancreas and skin because if you took the time and to kill something, you eat everything. You don't throw away all the other parts you don't want besides the lean muscle. And so some of the things lost in the modern diet is collagen and hyaluronic acid. Big players in health. So collagen, for instance, big player in where fat is distributed. Without collagen, you tend to grow more abdominal fat. Without collagen, you have more arterial disease. You have more acceleration of skin aging. You have deterioration of joint cartilage. Hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid, Sean, so interesting. It's one of the few fibers sourced from animals. Fibers come from plants, right? But hyaluronic acid is one of the very few fibers that come from animals, mostly brain, skin, and tongue. And if you get hyaluronic acid, it thickens the dermal layer of skin. You lose wrinkles. It increases the collagen in your joint cartilage. It increases the synovial fluid, the lubricating fluid in your joints. It increases the glycocalyx. That's the lining hairs on your arteries that control tone of arteries. In other words, we lack this blunder called dietary guidelines caused us to abandon numerous factors that influence what I call shape and body composition. And there's other factors, of course, but a big player in the proliferation of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and all those other conditions.
How do we get hydrolonic acid in our diets? Because I take like collagen peptide powder, so that's pretty easy, or I take bone broth, but I don't really know where I would get hydrolonic acid.
Most modern people are so squeamish nowadays, especially in North America. If I said, eat brain, You'd say, yuck, I'm not going to do that. Or
What are we in China?
so you make a good point. It's much worse in North America because of dietary guidelines. But that would be the solution. But most people don't want to do that. So we have to resort to supplements. One thing you should not do is bone broth for its collagen or hyaluronic acid. You can do broths, you can do soups. But this idea of prolonged boiling, like 36 hours in the presence of vinegar to mobilize nutrients, is a really bad idea because it also mobilizes lead. Bone is a natural concentrator of lead. And we now know that if you make bone broth, prolonged boiling with vinegar, it mobilizes lead and you get toxic levels of lead. You can make broths and soups, but maybe no more than 4 hours of boiling and never add vinegar. So I call it it doesn't sound very good, but I call it carcass broth. If you bake a chicken, for instance, eat the meat, eat the skin, etc. When you have the carcass left over, bones, ligaments, tendons, maybe some meat, some fat, whatever organs you can get, boil it maybe for 4 hours, no vinegar. And then that will have some of the good things in it, collagen, hyaluronic acid, some of the minerals, but not toxic levels of lead.
So broth also has hydrolonic acid as well, and we can also take that in a supplement form at a Whole Foods or at a grocery store. We can find those in the supplement lines.
Yeah, it's kind of a commodity product. You can find many good sources of hyaluronic acid. It's widely available. The ironic thing, Sean, is that this is not news to a lot of people who, for instance, if you have arthritis and it's unresponsive to anti-inflammatory agents, and they injected hydrocortisone, they can't do it too many times because it ruins your joints. So they inject hyaluronic acid, like Synvisc, and it increases the lubricating fluid in your joints for about 6 months, and then it's gone. So ladies who have their wrinkles injected with hyaluronic acid as a filler. So these things have been used for years. It's been known that, but rarely is it talked about that the real power of hyaluronic acid is orally. Ladies say to me, they say, oh, don't tell me about hyaluronic acid. I know all about it. I pay $150 for a 1 ounce vial of hyaluronic acid serum. I put it here and I've lost some of my crow's feet. Well, I asked them, okay, well, what happened to the skin on your neck or abdomen? Of course, nothing happened because the real power of hyaluronic acid is ingested orally as a nutrient. And the FDA, the USDA don't even recognize these things, collagen, hyaluronic acid, as being necessary for health. Yet they are critical for overall health, joint health, vaginal, uterine health, skin health, arterial health. And here we lead a life essentially devoid of collagen and hyaluronic acid. So those are among the things, there are other things, but those are among the things lacking in the modern lifestyle that have major impacts on the way you look, the way you feel, in your health.
Yeah, and I imagine the incentive is not there because the modern medicine and the health system today is designed to cure acute pain and acute problems that might potentially kill you rather than the preventative things that would help you feel good and prevent you from even going to the hospital later on in your life.
Absolutely. It's really bad in the US because it is a profit driven system.
Yeah.
It's sad. I wish it wasn't true, but it is true. Doctors are not incentivized to make you healthy. In fact, if you're healthy, you are useless to the healthcare system. So I have people in my audience who say, I went to the doctor and they said, what drugs do you take? They say, none. What do you mean, none? Everybody takes drugs. Everybody has to. They try to give you diseases. And it could be fairy tale diseases like high cholesterol. That's a complete nonsense condition, by the way, Sean. There is nothing wrong with cholesterol. Yet we have a multi-billion-dollar industry based on reducing cholesterol. That does not reduce heart disease risk, by the way, very much, maybe a little tiny bit, but not much at all. The real tragedy of a lot of this is that it takes everybody's focus, including the focus of doctors, off the things that actually cause disease, like heart disease. And the problem is it takes your focus off the things that do cause heart disease, because people actually have enormous control over risk for heart disease and other conditions, but it has nothing to do with the things your doctor's talking about.
Got it. Got it. Um, in terms of avoiding certain foods that might be gut disruptors to our health, I think we brought up nightshade vegetables, but it seems like that wasn't like uh, a big thing that you would suggest. I'm not sure. Like, do you think the lectin in nightshade vegetables like eggplants, carrots, tomatoes, bell peppers, do you think someone should be regularly eating those if they're trying to optimize their gut health, or should those be reduced in general?
Yeah, there's this idea of avoiding lectins is a fairy tale. It's a misinterpretation. I think a better interpretation is if you have colonic dysbiosis or worse, SIBO, 30 feet of disrupted microbiome, and you eat a food that has a lectin, which lectins are irritants to the gastrointestinal tract in people who have an inflamed gastrointestinal tract. So the solution
Mm.
is not avoidance of the food, whether it's FODMAPs or lectins or nightshades. It's to address the SIBO. You know, your great grandma ate all those foods, no problem. All those indigenous hunter gatherers, they eat all those foods, no problem. They would look at us and say, "What the hell is wrong with you people? There's nothing wrong with these foods. This is what we survived on for thousands of generations." Yet it's only been the last few years there's been this misinterpretation that it must be the food, not us. No, it's the microbiome.
Mm. Got it. So let's get into some of the tactical advice for people, which is probably why they're here, which is to improve gut health, to feel better, to look better. What are some tactical things that people can do today to help improve their gut health?
Well, one really helpful strategy is to include lots and lots of fermented foods. These are foods like sauerkraut, fermented sauerkraut, not the brine sauerkraut, kimchi, kefirs. The curious thing about fermented foods, Sean, is that they provide microbes and nutrients, but microbes like Leuconostoc mesenteroides or Pediococcus pentasaceus and other species. These are species that don't take up residence in the gastrointestinal tract, in human gastrointestinal. So what good are they? Well, very interestingly, this is based on the work of the husband-wife team, Justin and Erica Sonnenberg from Stanford. They showed that consumption of those foods and thereby those microbes, while they don't take up residence in the GI tract, they somehow cultivate the proliferation of healthy microbes. These are species like Akkermansia, Fecalibacterium, Ruminicaceae. These are butyric acid producing species, so-called butyrogenic species, that nourish the intestinal lining and thereby heal the gastrointestinal tract. The butyric acid enters the bloodstream, where it exerts effects on reducing blood sugar, blood pressure, abdominal fat, encourages healthy sleep, vivid dreams, healthier skin. In other words, fermented foods via an indirect mechanism are hugely powerful. Another thing is, because we've been overexposed to common antibiotics, probiotic species that we're supposed to have are susceptible to common antibiotics. So species, especially like Lactobacillus reuteri and Lactobacillus gasseri, these are two very unique species, Sean, in that they colonize the small intestine and the colon. Most species colonize the colon only, that is, probiotic species. Unhealthy species can colonize the entire GI tract. But reuteri and gasseri colonize the small intestine, where they take up residence and produce what are called bacteriocins. These are natural antibiotics effective in killing fecal microbes. So it's likely the loss of Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri that has allowed this issue of SIBO to affect half the population. So restoring those microbes pushes back SIBO. And so far, we've had over 90% success in eradicating SIBO by fermenting it as something that looks and smells like yogurt. It's not yogurt. It's not the stuff you buy in the store. It's not the stuff you make in your kitchen. It's using human microbes. So when you buy yogurt in the store, those are non-human microbes they're using. If you make beer or wine and ferment it, those are non-human microbes. If you make the sauerkraut or kimchi, non-human. We're going to ferment human microbes like Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, and we're going to use my method, my unique method of prolonged fermentation. You know, microbes don't have sex, right? There's no male and female microbes. They just double themselves. So reuteri, for instance, doubles itself every 3 hours at human body temperature. We're going to ferment it for 36 hours to allow 12 doublings. If we count the number of microbes, something we've done using a method called flow cytometry, laser-assisted microbe counting, and we get about 300 billion microbes per 120 milliliter serving, half cup serving.
Wow, that's insane. That's a
So
lot.
it's an easy, inexpensive way to amplify bacterial counts and making what I call SIBO yogurt, combination of Reuteri, Gasteri, and optionally Bacillus coagulans or Bacillus subtilis, a couple of spore-forming microbes. You can do them together. You can do them individually. I like individually because you don't have competition among the microbes. And so far, it's been 90% effective in normalizing SIBO. We know this for a fact because there's a new consumer device that your listeners might want to know about called the AIRE device,
Okay.
AIRE. This is the original, measures hydrogen. I have no relationship with the company. I know the inventor, Dr. Angus Short in Dublin, Ireland, good guy. This measures hydrogen gas and methane. I'm sorry, hydrogen gas. This one, newer one, measures hydrogen gas and methane. There's a specific diet prep you follow, and then we get a baseline measure, talks to your smartphone, 0 to 10 for hydrogen. And let's say it's low, 1.2, then you consume something that microbes can metabolize, like inulin is what we use. So maybe 2 teaspoons of inulin in your coffee, test again, 30, 45 minutes, it goes to 9.8. Any rise in 4 tells you that microbes are living in the upper GI tract. Well, Sean, I thought SIBO was this rare thing. But when this device came out in 2018, and I'm having thousands of people test, it's shocking. It was the exceptional person who tested negative. Now, you might say, well, maybe the device is flawed. It has been validated by formally. Like at Johns Hopkins, they did a study and compared the AIRE device to formal testing. You can do this in a lab or clinic. And it is very accurate. In fact, the AIRE device is probably superior to the lab or clinic methods because you don't have escape of gas. In a lab or clinic, they collect gas in a bag or a tube, and hydrogen gas is the smallest molecule there is and escapes rapidly. So if you test directly, there's no escape. So I think the AIRE device is actually superior to lab or clinic testing. But here's the great thing. People would be positive. They have SIBO. They have fecal microbes infesting their small intestine. They correct it, like with my SIBO yogurt. And they say, I did the yogurt for 4 weeks and my arthritis is gone. I was stuck in weight loss. I lost 73 pounds with wheat and grain elimination, sugar elimination. But I had 30 more to go. My weight loss plateau broke and I lost the 30 pounds. Or I was a type 2 diabetic. My hemoglobin A1C was 11.7, which is a level that you're rapidly on your way to kidney failure and blindness and amputations. It's now 6.1. So it's much better, but short of ideal, which is 5.0% or less. They address the SIBO and it drops to 4.8. So I saw people stuck in their weight loss or their health journeys finally achieve success by addressing the colonic dysbiosis or the SIBO.
Can you just walk through how to make your SIBO yogurt once again? Because 300 billion, that's an insane amount. The probiotics supplement that I take is 10 billion for the serving. So that's 30 times more than what I normally take. I think that'd be helpful for just walk through how to actually make it at home.
Well, Reuteri was the first microbe I played with. I got it. I originally sourced it from a Swedish company who sold it to you in very low numbers because they made it for infants. So I since have come out with our own versions. I formed a company called Realize Therapeutics Corporation, and we have a product line called Oxyceutics, OXICEUTICS. And we put out a product called My Reuteri so that people have this microbe. It's only 10 to 20 billion per capsule, but you take that capsule, you empty it into a bowl. I like to add a tablespoon of inulin, which is a fiber, and then add a little bit of, I use organic half and half. We don't use skim or reduced fat because that's reducing fat, saturated fat, in my view, is nonsense. So I use half and half. I don't know if you have that in your area. It's half cream, half whole milk. Add a couple tablespoons. Add a couple tablespoons, stir, break up the clumps, add the rest of the half and half. We do that, make that slurry so we don't have clumps. So top it off with the remainder of the half and half, cover, and then keep at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius for 36 hours. And you'll have a rich, thick, what looks and smells like yogurt. It's not yogurt, of course. It's fermented dairy made with human microbes. So that's the Reuteri. Gasteri, same conditions. the Bacillus coagulans. The original formulation I made was the third microbe was Bacillus coagulans, but we found since then that coagulans is not that reliable for fermentation in dairy. So we've replaced it with Bacillus subtilis, which is a wonderful fermenter and produces a wide array of those bacteriocins. And the subtilis you can either make as yogurt, but I like to make effervescent juices, sparkling juices. So you can get the microbe as a probiotic. In the U.S., I don't know what happens in South America, but in the U.S., you can go to like Aldi or Costco, and you can find kombuchas that are made with Bacillus subtilis. It's wrongly called kombucha. Kombucha is made with a SCOBY. That is a symbiotic collection of bacteria and yeast. So these things labeled kombuchas are not really kombucha, but nonetheless, some of them have this microbe called Bacillus subtilis. For instance, in the Aldi chain here, there's a very inexpensive product called Vital Life, Vitalife, for about $2. And it's a source of this microbe, Bacillus subtilis. So we take about a quarter to half cup, put it into some juice, make sure the juice has no preservatives, no potassium sorbate, no sodium benzoate, cap it, and then let it sit on your kitchen counter at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. What's that, about 35 Celsius? For 60 or more hours. You'll see it bubbling like crazy. So you want to leave that cap on loosely because it will explode if you keep it tightly capped. That's carbon dioxide. And that's a way to amplify counts of the Bacillus subtilis. You can make the yogurts, Reuteri gasterite, maybe subtilis or coagulants, or make juices out of the subtilis. And that little formula, it sounds complicated. It's not. Once you see it made, it's so easy. I have YouTube videos showing how to make it. I have
we'll link those.
Posts. I have it
We'll make sure to find those. Yeah,
so it's very easy. People tend to get intimidated because they're so used to getting ultra processed foods in a container. But it's just so easy. It's not foolproof. You have to pay some attention. You can't use contaminated utensils. You can't make it in the path of airflow from your air conditioner or your heater because it blows fungi from the air into it. You can't sneeze into it because you're going to blow microbes into it. So there's a little bit of attention to some detail, but all in all, it's extremely easy to do.
Yeah, I might even try that. So I guess you're saying taking something that is a probiotic that has 10 to 20 billion, which I have, you can put it into something like yogurt or juice, and that from the fermentation process, that'll turn into a 200 billion, 300 billion. I forgot what the unit name of that is, but that's how it amplifies the impact of it.
Yeah, it's just like having if I gave you a cucumber and you ate the cucumber, but you saved some of the seeds, you can plant them next spring and have a garden full of cucumbers or tomatoes or whatever. Same thing. You're going to take a few microbes and then let them grow, and you're going to have huge increases in count. It's the very same principle.
Right. Or like kimchi, you just take a regular cabbage and then you ferment it, and that becomes something that's great for your gut health. Got it. Do you think we should stick with food most of the time to support our microbiome, or do you think that the majority of prebiotic and probiotic supplements are effective compared to foods?
The least important thing you do for gut health is a probiotic, counterintuitively. The reason for that is most probiotics are formulated like this. They say, okay, we think Bifidobacteria infantis is good for you. Throw that into the mixture. We think that Lactobacillus paracasei is good for you. Throw that in. And on and on. So most current probiotics are haphazard collections of microbes with no thought of biological effects, of collaborative effects among microbes. Microbes, just like you and me, we have partners, we have friends, we have family, co-workers, neighbors, communities. Microbes are the very same. And the current crop of probiotics are haphazard collections of microbes. So the probiotic of the future will incorporate these collaborative effects and other metabolic interactions between microbes. Right now, there's only a handful of formulations that incorporate that. So one of the people I work with is a company called Biotic. They have some products like Sugar Shift, where my friend, Dr. Raul Cano, a microbiologist, formulated his mixture of products using collaborative effects, metabolic collaboration. That's about the only one I know that does that. And a lot of current probiotics do dumb things. For instance, double encapsulate their product to delay release into the colon. Well, you don't want it released into the colon. You want it released into the small intestine. And so you don't want to double encapsulate. There's a lot of mistakes being made in probiotic formulation. Another mistake, the failure to include what are called keystone species, foundational species, kind of like plankton in the ocean, Sean. If plankton, these little tiny creatures consumed by filter feeding creatures like jellyfish and whales, what if plankton were diminished in population, as they are, by the way, because of global climate change? Well, whale populations and jellyfish populations start to drop because they don't have access. So plankton is a foundational or keystone collection of species. So you want to restore those keystone species like Reuteri and Gasseri, among the most important. Because when you restore keystone species, it allows the proliferation of hundreds of other species. That's the wonderful thing. Modern people, if we compare our microbiomes, of course, the people you point out, the Hadza, the Maasai, the Yanomami, if we tried to mimic those microbiomes, we'd have to restore hundreds of lost microbes. Well, the great thing is you don't have to do that. You can let the microbes do it for you. Fermented foods, keystone microbes, and fibers, so-called prebiotic fibers from root vegetables, onions, garlic, shallots, leeks, dandelion greens, plant matter, and hyaluronic acid. And for the most part, the microbiome, the microbes take care of it for you. The whole era of antibiotics did us a disservice. It was great to have antibiotics, right? Since 1928, when penicillin was discovered in Toronto, right? But it gave us the idea that if you have a problem with a microbe, you kill it, right? If you have streptococcal pneumonia, kill it. If you have a staphylococcus skin infection, kill it. Well, those are exceptions. The real answer with the microbiome is not kill it. It's restore the microbes that took care of it for you. They keep order and structure by restoring healthy microbes. That's the great thing about the microbiome. So that's why probiotics are not the best, but fermented foods, magnificent, restoration of selected keystone microbes, and fibers. And that, for the majority of people, does it for you.
So should I be throwing away my supplements at this point? Because what about this idea of supplements that you take that are prebiotics or probiotics? They don't survive the stomach acid as it goes through our system. So actually, a lot of it isn't actually getting through our system. Is that true?
No, it's a fiction. So there are some species are diminished in numbers, but there are species that are very good at survival. So the two I mentioned to you before, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, survive at high numbers. And that's why if you took them orally as a probiotic or as the yogurt or other fermented foods and counted number in your stool, you'll find high numbers in the stool because of live microbes. They survived. And that's why they have these magnificent effects on SIBO, because they survive past the stomach acid and bile acid in the duodenum. And spore formers like Bacillus coagulans and Bacillus subtilis and others survive and germinate in the ileum. So, but there are other species, let's say Bifidobacteria longum. It'll be diminished. Maybe only half survive, but they still survive. That's why multiple studies have been shown. You take it orally, you recover in the stool in high numbers.
Got it. So if we're taking a supplement form, we want to make sure we look for L-uteri. And what was the other one you mentioned that had high survivability?
Lactobacillus gasseri.
Gasseri.
So in my Super Gut book, I show you where to source these things. But I wrote that book maybe 4 years ago. Since then, and this is a rapidly changing world, Sean, like AI. It's changing every day. So right now, I would suggest getting my source. It's called My Reuteri, and that's a 10 billion or 20 billion per capsule. Or I also create a product called Gut to Glow, which combines Reuteri with collagen peptides, hyaluronic acid and the carotenoid astaxanthin. I did that because ladies would say to me, I'm sick and tired of making the yogurt. So I thought, okay, fine. So I made these products, but you can make yogurt from them, either the My Reuteri or the Gut to Glow. One capsule is all it takes. Add some inulin, a quart or a liter of half and half, ferment for 36 hours, and that's one way to do it. The reason I added, by the way, those other components to the Gut to Glow formulation is because I'll tell this to ladies. So you restore Reuteri, colonizes the small intestine, helps you get rid of SIBO, but it also causes release of oxytocin from the brain. And the oxytocin hormone is, I call it the hormone of shape and body composition. You lose abdominal fat, you get a restoration of youthful musculature. So after your 20s and early 30s, you lose about a third of your muscle. It comes back. Libido goes up. Males, older males above 55 years old, get about a 50% boost in testosterone. Ladies have an increase in libido and increase in vaginal moisture and sensation. There's an amplification of the immune system. In other words, we don't have to talk about side effects, Sean. We get side benefit, magnificent benefits. So even though I called it SIBO yogurt, making people think it was only useful for SIBO, no. It's a lifetime thing. So what we do is four weeks of that SIBO yogurt formulation, and then consume it intermittently for the rest of your life, like 3 times a week or something like that. So we did a small clinical trial. Because the ladies, I don't know about your audience, my audience is 87% female.
Wow.
So ladies say, oh, we don't care about muscle. We don't care about libido. We just want better skin. Mm-hmm. You and I say, what the, really? So I did a small clinical trial to validate this stuff. We gave ladies 40 billion counts of Reuteri, collagen peptides, hyaluronic acid, astaxanthin in capsule form, not yogurt, but in capsule form. It's a study. You can't do yogurt in a study. And over 90 days, we did something called high resolution skin ultrasound. We measured the thickness of the dermal layer of skin. That's what makes your skin look good. And there was a dramatic increase in dermal thickness. But we also just happened to measure waist circumference because it's free. We're not pharma. We don't have the huge billions of dollars that pharma gets from ripping people off. We don't have that. So we did waist circumference. And to my shock, ladies lost as much as 8 inches off their waist circumference, 21 centimeters. Well, I thought, what in the world? But they didn't lose weight. Well, Sean, how can you lose up to 8 inches off your waist but not lose weight? Muscle. There's a restoration of youthful musculature. So we have a new clinical trial about to start. We're going to quantify formally all these things. Because what I think we've stumbled on in a skin trial, Sean, I stumbled, I believe, on a way to reshape the human body. Reduce abdominal visceral fat. It's abdominal fat, Sean, that has all the problems of fat, not fat beneath the skin, subcutaneous fat. It's fat in your buttocks or thigh. That may be an aesthetic issue, but it's not a health issue. It's the fat in your abdomen, abdominal visceral fat that encircles your abdominal organs. So I think we stumbled on a way to reduce abdominal visceral fat specifically while restoring youthful muscle. When I first started doing this myself, and this is years ago, in my early 60s, years ago, I gained 13 pounds of muscle in 3 weeks. And my strength increased by 50%. In my early 60s, I'm in my late 60s now, but and that's what I'm seeing happen. Loss of abdominal visceral fat and restoration. Now, by the way, this is occurring. I stumbled on this finding during this ridiculous world of GLP-1 agonists. These are the drugs like Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, all those stupid names. The drug people pay a lot of money. So let's say it's your wife. Your wife pays $12,000 for a year's worth of Wegovy. She loses 40 pounds. There's no question. They do work to lose weight. Of that 40 pounds, 30 pounds is fat, 10 pounds is muscle. Mm. Well, that loss of muscle has very serious implications. She stops the drug, because who's got money like that forever? She stops the drug. She regains 32 to 34 pounds of fat, more than she had, doesn't regain the muscle. Well, now, as a result of that, we know with good evidence, her metabolic rate has dropped about 27 to 29% permanently. Permanently. That means if she maintains a low calorie lifestyle and an intense exercise program, she's going to regain the weight. She's more at risk for type 2 diabetes, coronary disease, dementia, breast cancer than she was at the start because she lost the muscle. And the loss of muscle is pivotal because it means she's going to be more prone to fractures, falls, frailty, loss of independence. And the evidence is good. She's going to die several years younger because she lost muscle. So loss of muscle, horrible. Yet people are paying billions of dollars for those garbage drugs that ruin health. Well, I happened to stumble by accident on a way to restore youthful musculature while specifically targeting the most problematic form. Now, we're going to do a formal clinical trial to validate all this. I'm trying to look for a pharma partner. I hate the thought, Sean, of working with the pharmaceutical industry that I despise. But we're looking for a partner to do concurrent this formulation, Reuteri, collagen, hyaluronic acid, astaxanthin, concurrently with a GLP-1 agonist. Will that allow these people to stop the GLP-1 agonist and not regain fat and not lose muscle? So we're looking for a partner to do. Very expensive to do, so we're looking to do that. But I think we've stumbled on a new world of what I call shape and body composition, ways to reorganize shape and body composition.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and obviously that's kind of what everyone is talking about is taking the Wegovy's and Ozempics. I'm curious to know what the impact of taking these GLP-1s is to gut health.
To my knowledge, has not been looked at. There are probably beneficial effects by way of just weight loss alone, but to my knowledge, no one's looked at that. But it is clear these are horribly destructive drugs. And yet my colleagues, doctors, say things like, oh, they're magical, they're wonderful, not looking at the law. My prediction, Sean, is that there's going to be a whole bunch of class action suits against pharma when people realize that people are dying from these drugs. It doesn't happen during the drug. It happens years after you stop the drug. Or, of course, you could stay on the drug forever and continue to pump money in the pockets of big pharma, a corrupt and horrible industry that enterprises by taking advantage of people and their ignorance and the ignorance of my colleagues.
Well, what is the percentage? Are you familiar with the percentage of the number of people that actually regain unhealthy fat after they get off of, or actually the percentage of people that gain unhealthy fat after they start taking Wegovy? I mean, there's not a lot of time even, right? That these drugs have been out. So do we have a lot of concrete evidence on that?
Yeah, the best study is a UK study, the Wilding study. So this was the Wegovy preparation for 18 months. People lost a lot of weight, no surprise. And then they were tracked for 18 months after stopping the drug. Virtually every single one of the participants regained the weight. Now, the curve was like that, regaining the weight. And they stopped the trial after 18 months off drugs. So we don't know what happened long term. But it's not 100%. It's darn close to 100%. And this is, by the way, Sean, this is not just Wegovy. It's not just the GLP-1 agonist. It's any method of weight loss involving cutting calories. We could call it a weight loss program, an app that says, Sean, you're eating because you're stressed. Why don't you go talk to a friend or go for a walk? So all those efforts at cutting calories, it could be a bariatric procedure, lap band, gastric bypass, or GLP-1 agonist. These are all variations on the same theme, reducing calories. And we know with good evidence, when you reduce calories, regardless of the method, you will lose muscle. And losing muscle will impair your health and shorten your life. That's the more recent. So this idea of the weight loss shortening your life has been borne out by the analysis of the NHANES data in the U.S. The NIH tracks the health of tens of thousands of Americans. That's called the NHANES database. So 10,000 people in the NHANES database, about 20,000 people in EPIC Norfolk, the European data, and some other studies. About 50,000 people have been tracked. And people who lost the most weight died the youngest. Weight loss by the wrong method, that is cutting calories, regardless of method, shortens your life. This is what they've done, Sean. They've have delivered a drug that makes huge amounts of money, tens of billions already in the first couple of years, shortens your life. So my prediction is the people who survive regain the weight, and maybe you were pre-diabetic at the start, you take your year's worth of those drugs, or you have your barrier. Now you're type 2 diabetic when you stop the drug. When people recognize that these drugs ruin your health, there's going to be a lot of class action suits.
What about fasting, intermittent fasting, something that people can do on a sustainable basis? They fast for 18 hours or 16 hours, and then if they eat within a 6 to 8 hour window, where it's obviously inducing autophagy and that allows them to clean their system. There are evidence, I think at least in animals, that intermittent fasting has prolonged life and it can actually reset the microbiome rather than be a harm for you, even though those are calorie restrictions for many people. And it does lead to weight loss.
So time restricted eating, that is confining your eating period to maybe 8 hours or so, or brief intermittent fasts, 24 hours, 48 hours. When you get to about 72 hours, you start to lose muscle. And then you start to develop risk for loss of muscle, all the consequences of that. So it's okay for brief periods. And the shift in the microbiome, it can be positive. So for instance, let's say you fasted for 48 hours. You'll have a bloom in species like Akkermansia muciniphila. That's a good thing. So lots of Akkermansia is a good thing. So let's say you had 3% of your entire microbiome was populated by Akkermansia. You fast for 48 hours. Now you have maybe 5%. And the reason for that is Akkermansia and some other species thrive on fibers. If you deprive them of fibers, Akkermansia is looking for fibers, other microbes looking for fibers, but they don't get them. So other microbe species are diminished, like Faecalibacterium, lactobacillus species. They drop in populations. But Akkermansia has a very specific advantage. It can consume human mucus. That's why its name is Akkermansia muciniphila, mucus lover. So you fast, Akkermansia increased to 5%. What if you fasted for a week? Akkermansia continues to increase, 18%, 24%, 36% of the entire microbiome. And it starts to consume you. That is the mucus barrier of your intestines. That increases the entry of endotoxin. It increases endotoxemia. It causes intestinal inflammation. And that's why people say things like this. I was carnivorous or I was keto for 18 months. I lost weight. My waist shrunk. My triglycerides dropped from 280 to 44. My blood glucose dropped from pre-diabetic 112 fasting to 82. So all great effects, right, up front. And then 18 months or so, and they say, well, something's wrong. I'm constipated. My triglycerides are back up to 240. My blood glucose is now 114. I'm growing abdominal fat. That's from the overproliferation of Akkermansia and other microbes. So it's all a matter of time, Sean. But this is why I fear the ketogenic and carnivorous people didn't think it all the way through, that we know with good science, bad things happen when you deprive microbes of their fibers for more than a few days.
Got it. So I guess alignment with that, I'm curious, given that a lot of people may know this already, that you were a very successful cardiologist before this, and then you shifted your career into having an expertise in the gut microbiome. Heart disease obviously is, I think, still the number one cause of all mortality, at least in the US. But considering all the expertise that you have around heart disease and gut health, if you could redesign a modern diet with perhaps pre-wheat ancestral eating patterns, what are some of the unconventional foods, or just what would your typical diet be if you were to try to optimize your heart and microbiome?
So we would mimic the diets of the people you point out, the Hadza, the Yanomami, people in New Guinea, people unexposed to antibiotics, don't have smartphones, don't drive cars, don't have air conditioning. How do they eat? Well, they kill things with a spear or club or axe or bow and arrow. They fish, they gather shellfish, they steal bird eggs, they dig into dirt for roots and tubers, they gather wild fruit, wild fibrous, low sugar fruits. They eat food, things that are intuitively regarded as food. They all do this, regardless of what part of the world they're in. And you can see how far we've drifted from that kind of lifestyle. So they don't count calories. They don't mind their fat intake. If they kill a wildebeest or wild boar, they eat everything. They eat the liver, the bladder, the stomach, the intestines, the brain, the meat, uh, and supplement with those roots and tubers and fruit, birds' eggs, etc. So it's reverting back to that as best you can in the modern world. Most modern people, as we talked about, are so horrified by the thought of eating organ meats that that's not really a practical expectation. So we compensate for that by getting supplements like collagen and hyaluronic acid. The modern diet is so devoid of carotenoids. And carotenoids you must get from diet. Your bodies can't manufacture them. That you get carotenoids from eating whole foods, peppers, other brightly colored vegetables and fruit. And I use a supplement, astaxanthin, because astaxanthin is the pink or orange in salmon, shellfish. And it's the most potent among the carotenoids. So that really adds to body composition, by the way. It's never limiting fat or saturated fat. It's never eating wheat or grains, which never belonged to human diet in the first place. That was a mistake made by humans about 10,000 years ago. And you know what? Consumption of wheat and grains is a flagrant cardiovascular risk. People think about wheat and grains as being a gluten issue. It is a gluten issue, but it's also an amylopectin issue. That is, wheat and grains have a unique carbohydrate called amylopectin A, which is a potent trigger of small LDL. LDL cholesterol does not cause heart disease. That's ridiculous. Total cholesterol does not cause heart disease. So when people say, my doctor says I should take Lipitor because my LDL cholesterol is 210, I tell them, get a big, thick black magic marker, cross them out. They are meaningless. These are fictitious problems. The real cause of heart disease, there's many causes, but the real cause in the way of these lipoproteins and lipids is small LDL particles. That is LDL, not LDL cholesterol. That is cholesterol as an indirect marker for these particles. We're going to measure the particles themselves. LDL, low density lipoprotein particles. That is fat carrying particles. Small LDL originates with a consumption only of wheat, grains, and sugars. Not bacon, not pork fat, not butter, not olive oil. Only wheat, grains, and sugars, because it's sugars and amylopectin A of grains that causes your liver, this gets a little complicated, causes your liver to convert those sugars or amylopectin A to triglycerides. That process is called liver de novo lipogenesis, the liver conversion of carbohydrates to fats, triglycerides. Triglycerides can't float freely in the bloodstream because if they did, they'd coalesce like salad dressing. Oil separates from the water. So the liver packages those triglycerides in a protein-containing particle called VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. VLDL does cause heart disease directly. It enters the walls of arteries, and it interacts with those LDL particles, makes them triglyceride rich. It goes through a series of enzymatic remodeling steps, and you get small LDL. Small LDL, very, very different from large LDL. Eating fat gives you large LDL. Eating the amylopectin A of wheat and grains causes small LDL. Small LDL, it's smaller, it's better able to enter the artery wall. It's more adherent to structural tissues. It's more prone to glycation and oxidation that makes it much more aggressive in causing heart disease, much more likely to trigger inflammation, and it lasts 5 to 7 days in the bloodstream as compared to 24 hours of large LDL. And that's because a small LDL has a different shape that conceals the recognition protein, the apoprotein B, that your liver recognizes and would clear it. But when the particle's small, the apoprotein B is partly concealed and the liver can't see it. And so small LDL particles that start with your consumption of wheat and grains and sugars circulates around and around and around and around for 5 to 7 days, giving it lots of opportunity to enter the walls of arteries. So the diet, low in saturated fat and cholesterol, rich in healthy whole grains, causes heart disease.
Got it. So someone listening to this might be a little confused because they go to their doctors, they get their blood panels, they see their LDL, they see their total cholesterol, they see their HDL, they see their triglycerides. Let's say their LDL shots up and it's high, and their total cholesterol is high. They're listening to this and saying, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. But how do they actually know what percentage of that is small particles of LDL versus the high ones? What's the actionable step here for people to actually be able to get the right information, because it's clear they're not getting that from the medical system?
No, because my colleagues have been so brainwashed by the pharmaceutical industry with this nonsense that LDL and total cholesterol are causes for heart. They're not. This science, Sean, goes back 60 years. It's not like this was discovered last Tuesday. This has been well established, but it doesn't make money for the pharmaceutical industry. So the doctor has a 30-year-old woman in a miniskirt telling him that Lipitor is the drug to take. That's how the world works. It has nothing to do with science. It has to do with how you influence prescribing behavior. But several ways to do this. One way would be to do lipoprotein testing, not cholesterol testing or lipid testing, but lipoprotein testing. Most common method nowadays is NMR, lipoprotein testing, nuclear magnetic resonance. All that means is you take the clear part of your blood, or the lab should, and put it into a magnetic field, and it generates signals that can be interpreted to tell you how many particles they have of all those different categories. It's not just small LDL, but large LDL, VLDL, and other particles. So that's one method. And these are, I'm not sure how available it is in your neighborhood, but it's widely available here. Though your doctor may say something like, oh, Sean, we don't do that here, or it's not covered by insurance, or it's experimental. All that's fiction. That's nonsense. It's been proven widely. It's available. It's covered by insurance, covered by Medicare. What your doctor is saying, Sean, I can't be bothered educating myself. So I'm going to tell and make fun of you and tell you it's stupid. This is how my colleagues work, by the way. When they don't know something, rather than say, hey, Sean, that's something I really don't know a lot about, I'll have to educate them. They say, oh, that's stupid. You got that from Dr. Google, didn't you? That's how most of them, I'm generalizing, of course. There are good colleagues who are trying to educate themselves and learn new things, but the vast majority have been educated by the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry, a system built on revenue, not on health. That's one way. An indirect way would be this. So on a conventional lipid panel, cholesterol panel, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides. Well, almost all the attention is paid to LDL cholesterol, which is a calculated value, by the way. It's not measured. It's a calculated value. But the HDL and triglycerides actually are helpful. If you get your triglycerides to 60 milligrams per deciliter or less, I think what is that, 2 point something micromolar? And HDL cholesterol to 60 milligrams, so 60, 60. HDL above 60, triglycerides below 60. That is an indirect reflection that you have little or no small LDL, because it's triglycerides in VLDL particles that create small LDL. So you can use the triglycerides specifically to indirect. That's not always true, but it's 95% plus true.
Okay, and then what are your thoughts on ApoB as a measurement for your blood panel?
So that's another fiction. ApoB is slightly better than LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterol is not measured, it's calculated, right? Apoprotein B is the protein. There's one apoprotein B particle per LDL particle and per VLDL particle. So apoprotein B provides a virtual count of LDL and VLDL particles. Problem. So what if I told you, Sean, your apoprotein B is 140 milligrams per deciliter? What does that tell you about it? Nothing. It just tells you have a lot of LDL and VLDL particles. What if I did the NMR test or other method of lipoprotein, and I said, okay, Sean, you have 2,000 nanomoles per liter particle count per volume of total LDL particles, of which 1,600 are small LDL particles. What does that tell you about you? It tells you you're consuming wheat, grains, and sugars and creating small LDL. It tells us you're insulin resistant. That amplifies this effect. It tells us you're inflamed. You probably have too much abdominal visceral fat. Your HDL particles are abnormally small because they're subject to influences from those other particles and thereby not protecting you. It tells us that you have lots of VLDL particles. tells us you have lots of triglycerides. In other words, knowing that small LDL is a proportion of total LDL tells you all kinds of things about you, because all those things cluster together. An apoprotein B of 140 milligrams per deciliter tells you nothing. And so while it's a little bit better than calculated LDL cholesterol, it is not the best test. The tragedy of all this, Sean, is that preventing heart disease, regression or reversal of heart disease is easy. But everybody's attention was focused on these fairy tales: saturated fat, LDL cholesterol, apoprotein B. When if you think it through, you realize, no, it's you measure the actual particles that cause heart disease, small LDL, VLDL, and the factors that amplify it. Insulin resistance, inflammation, and by the way, endotoxemia from SIBO. Major cardiovascular risk factors. So we're back to the microbiome. That if you have coronary disease, you have SIBO and endotoxemia, virtually guaranteed. So part of the solution is not just cutting your saturated fat. This has nothing to do with heart disease, but addressing the microbiome. And by the way, the way we address insulin resistance, this ubiquitous factor that leads to abdominal fat accumulation, type 2 diabetes, dementia, breast cancer, all these things, is don't eat foods that raise insulin. Wheat, grains, and sugars. Address common nutrient deficiencies that contribute to insulin resistance: lack of vitamin D, magnesium, because you drink filtered water, you have to. Water in the stream or river has sewage and other things. We restore iodine that we're supposed to get from the ocean, and restore omega-3 fatty acids, because people don't want to eat brain anymore. And it's hard to eat a lot of fish because it's contaminated by mercury, shellfish by cadmium, so we take it as a supplement. So those four nutrients, iodine, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acid, vitamin D, those four things, when you put them together and restore these. So this is not like this is restore factors lost from modern life. And those things synergize to minimize insulin resistance. Then we address the microbiome, because endotoxemia, major driver of insulin resistance, major cardiovascular risk factor. Yet I have a beef about this, Sean. You go to your gastroenterologist, and he says, Sean, you need a colonoscopy to look for colon cancer, right? He does his colonoscopy, he's patching up, no colon cancer, see you in 5 years, right? He didn't tell you that the oral microbiome plays a major role in causing colon cancer. For instance, there's a microbe called Fusobacterium nucleatum that proliferates when you have bleeding gums or gingivitis or periodontitis, that gains access to the bloodstream and then transplants itself into the colon, where it's a major factor in causing colon cancer. And other microbes in the colon. So if your gastroenterologist were serious about preventing colon cancer, yeah, he would do a colonoscopy, yeah. And then say, okay, Sean, no colon cancer now, but let's talk about your oral microbiome and your colonic microbiome and SIBO. Let's address those things so you don't get colon cancer. If the cardiologist was serious about preventing coronary disease, he or she would say, all right, let's forget about this nonsense with cholesterol. It's garbage. There's no relation with heart disease. It's fiction. It's a misinterpretation of crude science from the 1950s, 1960s. Let's instead talk about how small LDL and VLDL are provoked. Let's talk about nutrients to address insulin resistance. Let's address the microbiome, because endotoxemia is a major cardiovascular risk factor, amplifies insulin resistance. That would be the solution to that's how you prevent heart disease. But you can see the tragedy here. All this attention is focused exclusively on these boogeymen. LDL cholesterol, right? Saturated fat. They have nothing to do. That's why the Hadza or the Anomami, they don't say, I'm not going to eat that animal's liver because it's too high in fat and cholesterol. They eat it, and they have no heart disease. They have no heart disease.
Yeah, it's so funny because I've been educated my whole life that if I ate too much egg yolks, if I ate too much eggs, if I ate butter, if I ate any sort of saturated fats, that dietary cholesterol is going to lead to the cholesterol in my blood panels as well. Are you saying there's really no effects of that in terms of the actual harm that it does in terms of a risk of a heart disease? If I ate a lot of eggs, if I ate a lot of butter, there's really no correlation to it.
There is only if you consume wheat, grains, and sugars. In other words,
Mm,
so from the perspective of VLDL and small LDL, saturated fat, total fat do not trigger those formation. They amplify their expression. In other words, if I eat wheat, grains, and sugars, the amylopectin A of wheat and grains or sugars, I provoke formation of small LDL. Saturated fat increases the small LDL, but only if something else triggered their formation. So you can see a lot of this stuff is based on conventional misinterpretation of data. And by the way,
interesting.
there never was evidence to show that saturated fat and total fat cause heart disease. The American Heart Association actually said this in their recent reiteration of their dietary guidelines, which are garbage. They said, based on the studies performed in the 1950s and 1960s, cutting saturated fat reduces cardiovascular risk. If you look at those studies, you almost laugh because they were so poorly in their defense back then, no one knew how to construct a clinical trial. It was very crude. Stupid things were done. Like, we're going to feed you hospital food for a week and let you go home on the weekends. And then we're going to take the holidays off. And goofy stuff. In other words,
Mm,
deeply flawed studies. But here's another issue. Then they used more recent, what's called epidemiologic observational evidence. These are the physician's health study, nurse's health study, all these studies. How are those studies done? Like this. I say, Sean, what'd you eat for breakfast on Monday? You say, oh, I had a bowl of oatmeal and skim milk and a banana. What'd you have for lunch? I had a ham sandwich on rye with mustard and a container of yogurt. What'd you have for dinner? We do that for 5 days. I contact you in 10 years. I say, Sean, what's happened to you? Did you have colon cancer, heart disease? What's happening? Whatever. And then we try to backtrack whether that disease can be associated with your 5 days of food questionnaire. That's how it's done. Now, wait a minute. In the 10 years since you provide those 5 days of diet, you got divorced. You drank too much for 2 years. You did some binge drinking afterwards. You went on an all expense paid vacation twice to Mexico. You gained 40 pounds. You lost 20 pounds. You did a liver cleanse 2 times. You found a new woman in your life, and in other words, you're telling me that 5-day questionnaire predicts disease? Of course it does not. Yet that is the basis, Sean, that is the basis for all dietary guidelines and dietary advice. Garbage data based on a questionnaire while you conducted your life and all the enormous ups and downs of life. And so that's called observational evidence. It's garbage evidence. Yet that is the basis for all the dietary guidelines.
Is this also rooted from how Ansel Keys originally did his studies?
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of misinterpretation too. We can't blame him too much. He was clearly a misguided person. But, we're talking about 1950s, 1960s. We're talking about when a lot of this science was so crude as to be
Mm.
laughable. It has improved, but the tragedy is, of course, as the science has advanced, most practicing physicians have no idea whatsoever what's going on. They still adhere because, practicing physicians are busy people, right? They're practicing 60, 70 hours a week. They don't have time to learn. So they take the easy way out, which is talk to that sexy sales rep in a miniskirt who promises dinner and an all-expense trip to Orlando. Because I think that's the world I came from. You know what's worse, Sean? The world of procedures, of medical devices. So I used to go from 6 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 8 o'clock at night doing procedure after procedure. And in the cath lab, you'd have these beautiful women and some guys saying, Dr. Davis, do you want to come to dinner on Saturday? We're going to go to some fancy restaurant. Or we want key thinkers like you to come to Orlando and we'll pay for your weekend. That's how physicians learn. It's sad to say.
It's
But in
hard
the
to
real
say no to
world,
that, I guess. Yeah.
it is hard to say no. I grew up very poor in New Jersey. And when I was deeply in debt when I first graduated. And I have these sexy women promising all kinds of things. You're like, oh, yeah, I'll take it. So I took the bait at first until I realized this is stupid. What they're selling me things. And I saw
Yeah.
the incredible corruption and persuasion that occurs in the medical world.
Yeah, no, nothing is free, right? If someone gives you a free lunch, you should always be skeptical. Um, as a final kind of topic here for you, I saw this video going around, which is always interesting because you don't know exactly how scientifically backed it is. But there was these I think they were experts in gut microbiome as well, and they were teaching parents that they shouldn't encourage their children to wash their hands all the time because often when we're using hand sanitizers or we're constantly washing our hands, we don't get some of we're always removing the bacteria that might be good for us, even though we're removing some of the bad. What are your thoughts on this of not encouraging people, including children, to be washing their hands at every given moment, which is very counterintuitive to how you know, what we went through in the last 3 years with the pandemic and COVID and all of these things, where that's all we were doing.
There is a germ of truth in that. That is, you don't want you do want to wash your hands if you're in contact with other humans, because that's where we get pathogens from other humans or other animals in case you touch their fecal material. So there is a value to washing your hands to get rid of the microbe, the bacteria, and the viruses that can make you sick. But in general, if a child's playing outdoors, playing in the dirt, uh, they should not wash barring grotesque filthiness, of course. But they don't have to wash their hands. Children who play in grass and outdoors and climb trees, but there's obviously a lot more to a child's microbiome. That child preferentially should have been fed nutrients while in utero, like omega-3 fatty acids, major influence on the health of a pregnant woman. It reduces the likelihood of premature labor. Because a child delivered prematurely, that life can be marred for a lifetime. A child delivered at 28 weeks, for instance, can have impaired neurological, immunological, and psychological maturation. So omega-3 fatty acids taken by a woman in utero, most ladies of reproductive age get almost zero, 150 milligrams tops. The ideal intake is probably north of 3,300 milligrams. So a woman gets omega-3 fatty acids. A woman gets Lactobacillus crispatus, the vaginal microbe that makes a healthy vaginal lining and prevents premature labor and miscarriage and reduces the likelihood of preeclampsia and eclampsia, seizures by the baby or mom that can be fatal during pregnancy. Passes Bifidobacterium infantis from her vagina or breast milk onto the child, who she then breastfeeds, because it's Bifidobacterium infantis that allows the child to metabolize human milk oligosaccharides. That are the primary nutrient source in breast milk. If a child does not have Bifidobacterium infantis and or is not breastfed, that child's going to have impaired neurological maturation, psychological, immunological maturation, more prone to type 1 diabetes, obesity later in life, will have a lower IQ. In other words, there's a child microbiome and female microbiome. Very interesting things. I happen to have a daughter-in-law who has no shortage of resources. She's got a gastroenterologist, endocrinologist, obstetrician, gynecologist, functional medicine doctor, primary care doctor, rheumatologist. She's
Oh my
got
God.
everything, right? And no one mentioned any of these things to her, Sean. This is the status of modern healthcare. Massive negligence and ignorance on issues relevant to health. Something as crucial as pregnancy, delivery, early childhood maturation. My son, who's kind of a wise ass like me, says to her obstetrician, "Hey, what do you think? Is there any benefit to probiotics in pregnancy?" Obstetrician says, "No, they've been shown not to work." What? No, the benefits are massive if done in an informed way, like the restoration of Lactobacillus crispatus, the vaginal microbe, like restoration of Bifidobacterium infantis, critical for the first year of neurological development. And there's more, of course. Lactobacillus reuteri, crucial, Sean, because it via oxytocin, the hormone oxytocin, facilitates uterine contraction at delivery. It facilitates breast milk expression. That's why a lot of ladies say, "I can't breastfeed. Nothing comes out. I don't have enough." Lack of reuteri and oxytocin. And the maternal infant bond after delivery is driven by oxytocin. Now, 96% of all Americans have lost Reuteri and thereby oxytocin. So, so childhood development, childhood health, yes, don't wash your hands when you come in contact with dirt and grass, only with other humans and animals. But there's a lot more a parent can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. And I think it's hard to really have conviction on who to actually trust when it comes to medical advice or what's really good for you long term, especially with doctors. Like I have numerous times, gone to doctors and people that I later have advised me something, and then I would go back, look it up on ChatGPT or Grok or any of these LLM models, and I would come back to them and say, well, what are your thoughts about this? Have you thought about this? And then oftentimes they're like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Like I haven't really explored that." They were just trying to be the credible expert based on the position that they have, and they're not used to having people go and do the research. So it encourages people to really be self agents in a world of very confusing information out there, and to do your own research. So I think that's why conversations like this are so great, Dr. Davis. So yeah, appreciate you once again for coming on. I want to make sure people learn more about your books, about you. You've got a new company you mentioned that I'm sure you want to encourage people to check out as well. Where are the best places to point people towards?
So my Super Gut book details a lot of this stuff. I have a new book coming out later this year called, I hate the name, as I told you, Super Body. Not my idea, the publisher's idea.
It's not bad. Yeah.
That Realize Therapeutics Corporation is the company I co-founded. A lot of the information will be found at oxyceutics.com, oxyceutics.com. I have a blog, WilliamDavisMD.com. It's got thousands of blog posts. I have a two-way thing like this, membership, called innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com. So I try to make, because Sean, this is why I support what you're doing, because the doctors don't know. And as you point out, I like to say doctors deliver ignorance with authority. They tell you, they make fun of you. They say, Sean, that's stupid. Or I don't know. Did you get an MD? So I saw all the stupid things they say to belittle you when you're just trying to manage your health, because they don't know what they're doing. They have no, it makes me laugh, Sean. People say, if you're going to take the supplement, be sure to consult your doctor. The doctor doesn't know. He or she has no idea. So that, as the point you make, it's up to you. It's up to your listeners. It's up to you and me to take the reins of health, because it ain't coming from the healthcare system.
Amen. Amen. Dr. Davis, thank you again for coming on the show, and thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Sean.